get it started. Just want to say like, wow, it's I'm just like really grateful that like we have a full house today, and this is the first time I'm putting together a professional development session, and also grateful to be joined by 3 highly productive scholars who are whose work and scholarship are really just inspiring for me. So yeah, and all right, so let's get started. So just some like logistic things. The overall format will be just like each of us will talk for about 10 minutes. In the end, there will be like about 20 minutes for Q&A. For the Q&A, and in case you are interested in like having the handout or like see a video recording of this, you will be able to see the OSF folder that I dropped the link in the comment section in the Huba. And also just to facilitate the Q&A in the end, so if you have any questions, just leave your question again in Huba in the Q&A over there. So I will be the one to moderate the conversation in the end. All right, I will go ahead and get it started. So I'm a grad student. I was a grad student in University of Minnesota. It's like a public school, and after that, I'm a postdoc at Stanford. So when I was a grad student, I often have to address a lot of limitations. 2 of which are the limited use of my time and the limited funding I have access to. So I will share my perspective and the tips that I just came up with that helped me to navigate that process. Quick disclaimer, at least for my presentation, the tips that I'm sharing here that are the tips that work the best for me. And of course, like different people have different kind of working style. So if whatever I'm saying here doesn't work for you, totally fine. And sometimes you can even hear like a really contradictory or different kind of perspective that are just entirely the opposite of what I'm saying. I would just say like find a way that works for you. The best tip is the tip that works for you. I would say that. And here I would just like share a couple of just like 2 or 3 tips in each stage of the research activity, starting from literature review. In the last like maybe half year or so, you guys probably heard about like this ChatGPT, just like kind of blow up on the internet. Then like some people start to use it for literature review, and find out that this thing actually hallucinates a lot. It just gives you a fake citation and all of those. So don't use ChatGPT for that purpose. On the other hand, I actually know there are 2 other resources that are artificial intelligence based for literature review, and I've been using them for a couple of years. They have been around, and they're specifically focused on that. So I want to just share a little bit of what they are. The first one is Elicit. What you can do is to, by the way, all of the links for everything, they will be in the slide, so you can just like download that. You don't have to write everything down. What you can do is just to go on that website and enter the question in your natural language, what your research question is, and what it does is to like just pull whatever relevant article for that particular question, give you a very concise summary from the perspective that's actually relevant to you instead of your research question, instead of just dumping everything. It can also give you like a summary that is in a whole paragraph like this. Again, that's specifically tailored to your research question. And there's also a lot of other ways you can engage with it, including like say if you are doing a meta-analysis or a systematic review, you want to see the sample size of different kind of study, you can just like click number of participants, and it will just literally give you a column and pull the sample size out of it. Or say if you want to know what kind of an outcome they're doing, whether it's experimental or not, like sometimes you can just like click that and just give you that kind of information. And one other thing I really like about this is that it can't just break the interdisciplinary boundary. I'm a psychologist, but I do a lot of political psychology work, and sometimes I just somehow miss the political science part of the work. But this is the AI; it doesn't like care what kind of discipline boundary you have. So it is really helpful for you to like see the work that's just entirely from a different field. Highly recommended for if you don't have any idea of like what is the kind of work done in the field, you can just like ask an open question. It will give you. And say you have like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 papers that you gathered from the Elicit, and you want to be more comprehensive. One thing I recommend you do is to use citation gecko. What this thing does is that after you enter a couple of key papers, what they call the seed paper, it will generate a citation network based on who have been citing them and who these papers have been citing. And based on that, it will recommend a couple papers, show us the black dots, and show you how they are connected and which paper they're being connected. And you can go through each of them and see which one that's actually relevant to your question, and designate it as the new seed paper. And it will update the citation network and give you new recommendation. Then you can just reiterate that, and after 20, 30 papers, maybe you will be able to get a better view. So yeah, here are just two quick literature review tools that have been really helpful for me. All right, so let's say now you have the papers, you want to get the readings done in the long reading folders you have. So here's just two quick tips from my own perspective. Say if it is an empirical paper, personally, I really don't like to read everything from the first word to the last word. Personally, I would recommend read it out of order. This is just how I recommend it. You do you, whatever works for you. The rationale for what I'm doing here is that if I read the abstract and table or figures, usually I feel like that is the best way it can give me the overview of what the paper is about. In other way, I would say it gives me the highest return of information per amount of attention I'm paying to it. Then after that, usually I will have some expectation or assumption about the method or what they can possibly discuss. Then reading the method after that, usually just feel like a process of confirming what I assume or not, as opposed to trying to figure out exactly what they're doing. So I will recommend that. And the discussion and the introduction, that kind of just following the same logic. Whatever the discussion will say, it's just a natural progression of the method. Then finally, in the end, if I read the introduction, I will say, okay, this is how I should contextualize it and why this is important. So that's for an empirical paper that has experiments and data. For long review pieces, how do I say this? So I have ADHD, actually the diagnosed ADHD, and I just have hard time sitting down and reading a real long piece. I would just be bored out of my mind. So in around the second year of my grad school, what I figured out is that, actually there's a way I can convert the PDF from the scientific paper, get rid of all the citation, and turn it into an audio file. So I created if you're interested in, first, I highly recommend everyone to do this. Because, at least give it a try just once. If it works, it's gonna save you a lot of time, because for me, about say 90% of the papers in my grad school, I didn't read a word, I listened to all of them. I remember there's a Grand Canyon trip, there was 120 pages of a paper I need to read, I listened to all of them. And the weird thing is there's a memory research about okay, if you process information in one sense, you while you're doing other things, you will associate them. So I keep remembering different part of the Grand Canyon with oh yeah, this is that implicit bias paper. Talk about the criticism over there. So it's kind of really helped me to remember this. So yeah, for when I'm cooking Chinese food, it's yeah, so the tutorial is over there. There's other methods you can do the conversion. If you find a better way, please let me know. I will help you to popularize it. So yeah, that's the second little tip. Say, okay, now you have done literature review, you have also, you're ready to execute those studies. Here are just some tips that have been really working well for me to really maximize the return for my time and the investment of the research fund. When I was a grad student, I have about $600 per year. That's not much money. Sure, I can do the public data, the ANES, but in the end, it's I still need some kind of experimental data. So the way I maximize it is that I really prioritize which experiment to go first and how to do them so that I can get the most return of the investment I do. So what do I mean? So first, in system management, there is this idea called single point failure. Which means that if that point is failed, then the whole system fails. And I would say if you're introducing a really new and novel theory that makes, say, 5 different predictions, and you have maybe 10 different kinds of studies that can test it, longitudinal, correlational, experimental, cross-cultural, whatever it is, I would say you pick the one that if this thing fails, it is most capable of nullifying your whole package. Because if that thing doesn't work out, then the rest of it, sure, it might still be publishable if you reframe it or whatever, but usually it diminishes the either the theoretical contribution or the novelty of the whole paper by a lot. You have to do a lot of work behind it to justify it. That would be really hard. So I would recommend doing that. Like whatever thing that can nullify it the most, whatever is the most consistent, conservative version of the test, do that first. And the second thing I want to recommend is that when you're putting that study together, so this is the part I would imagine to be controversial. I'm not talking about this to be public, but most of the time when I was being trained, I was told to do like an experiment, you have a manipulation, DV, and you think about as many possible mediators and moderators there is possible and stick all of them in. So if I have $500, 200 participants, and that's all I do. If it fails, then I have to spend all the time to justify and test whatever thing is going on and try to make the use of the best of it. Around later part of my grad school career, I do everything opposite of that. So what I did is that I will try to say, think about 5 different ideas that are just really not related to each other. The measure, the manipulation, or the correlational nature, they have nothing to do with each other. And I do the most bare bone version of that. Manipulation, DV, no more than 1 minute, 60 seconds, or maybe 2 minutes. And I put everything together in the same circle. So like if this is one study that fails, then it's just like really hard. But if you have 5 different things, like very different, some would, like the likelihood of all of them to fail, it will just be low. So of course, the people can worry about like, okay, it might be some spillover effect or whatever thing is going on, you can have contamination or whatever, and that's the point when you're like trying to replicate it in the future. So after you do 2-3 replication, then you can start to add like the more costly thing, say like the 3 mediators or 5 moderators, you can start to test them. Anyhow, so that's what worked for me. If it doesn't work for you or your advisor is against it, then try something else. I don't know. So that is that. Let me see. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. Do the most bearable version of the study. Oh, right. One more thing I want to say about that is that how do I say it? So even if your most critical version of the study, the most like single point failure version of the study, it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that the money or the resources is wasted. Sometimes it happens in my own career as well. It's like the failed experiment, it doesn't make sense to do more investment in the immediate future, so I want to get published soon instead of like figuring this out with more money, which I didn't have. But like a year later, like some new theoretical approach will be introduced, then somehow this whole thing will make sense. And sometimes I will be the one to write that up. And that can be like part of the new package for something I will replicate. So like, hey, if we do it this way, it keep fail, and there's an explanation for that. We have to look at it like in a different way. So just because something failed, it doesn't mean that you really have to discard the data. So just a little of that. Yeah, so I have that picture just to demonstrate you can put like everything together in the same package. A little bit tips on writing. My general way of writing that works really well for me is to front load as much high quality writing as possible. So the first time I'm thinking about an idea that I need to communicate with my collaborator or anyone who I need to talk to, I will try to write the highest quality version that I will be comfortable to put into a paper, because usually it's not going to be the last time I will need to communicate the same exact idea. People will ask me somewhere, and at least I will also need to write it in the paper or put in a presentation somewhere. So by doing that, a lot of time when I'm actually writing the paper, I will be able to say, if it's the first time I need to write it down, it's simply for registration, if I'm writing down, I can just copy paste it. The first time, if I'm trying to email my collaborator to explain whatever concern they have, I will write it very well, and usually after sending the email, I'll copy paste it into a Word doc or a slide just to keep it so that every time in the future anyone asks it, I don't have to write the whole thing again and just like spend all the time to do that. So that is about writing. Okay, so I think that's pretty much most of what I wanted to talk about. In the very last couple slides, I have like a couple of tools for automating the research writing process. I will not go into the detail, but there are like things like R package, including like if you want to have like analysis being written in a boilerplate language, like the t-test, like this thing higher than that, whatever confidence interval, you have to usually copy paste it. The report package will do that for you. It's still not perfect, but like it can copy, you can copy paste the chunk directly in your text without spending more time on just going through everything. And if you want it, t-test is not the only thing. Like they do natural language for a lot of things, regression, whatever, base model and everything. And they say if you want to create tables, regression and correlation table, I created a package myself. I don't know, I have tweeted about it. I don't know how many people actually will use it. So maybe this is a point for me to advertise it. But like for the regression, I created this package that can be accessed here. It can just really give you psychological, APA-friendly format of the table. You still need to like change the font and everything, but like this is as close as I can get. I'm sending those for a couple of other things. Yeah, and right. And the very last thing is that Juan was like a very in the very early stage as a grad student. Like the first paper I wrote was like a Word doc opening up, and it was like, oh, my head was just like a blank. It was like, where do I start? Then gradually I realized I started to formulate a universal formula for how to write any paper. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but this is sort of applicable to maybe 80% of how people can write it. It's not perfect, but you can copy paste it into your own Word doc and replace part of it. And usually having a word on the Word doc, usually that is something that can just like reduce the what do you call that, the roadblock or the mental roadblock to actually continue to write. So that's all I have, and I will conclude this talk by thanking all of you for being here. All right, the next coming up is Joshua Jackson.
Thanks, Max. How's the volume in the back? People hear me? Great. That was incredibly helpful and useful. I'm probably going to rewatch that later. Time for something shorter and probably less useful, but I hope you get something out of it nonetheless. I'm giving a few presentations here actually at SPSP, and this was by far the most difficult one to create because it's so difficult to come up with strategies that will work for everyone, given that we all come from different backgrounds, we learn in different ways, we're trying to do different things and be in different places, and we enjoy the different elements of the research process. And so you're most productive when you're enjoying yourself. So it's difficult to say, impose what I enjoy onto other people. I tried to do a little bit of homework when I was making this, so I looked at some YouTube videos that were extremely unhelpful, trying to propose, just generic advice about finding what you love. Maybe the system liked those YouTube videos. I asked ChatGPT what I should talk about, and they say to be productive, you should conduct research, collaborate with other researchers, do a few other things that make sense, but maybe are too obvious to the people in this room. And so ultimately, I landed on a couple of things. First of all, I want to re-emphasize something that Max said, and I think that's something that's very important, that there is no one way to be productive, because productivity is not just one thing. And for some people, that might look like how to publish a paper every couple of years while having great work-life balance, and for some people, it might be something different. But first, I'm going to give you 10 things just from my own research journey that I think have helped me and that are somewhat concrete. And hopefully some of those will help you. And then something that I think would help everyone is I just collated a bunch of free data sets that have different strengths. Some of them are cross-cultural, some of them are anthropological and ethnographic, are relevant to psychological questions, at least I think so. I put all of these slides on an OSF page, and I also just tweeted about all of the resources so you can download them from Twitter as well. All right, so concrete tips, I'm going to kind of get through these relatively quickly. First is that there is absolutely no rush to start graduate school. There are probably some people in this room who have not started graduate school yet, and you are very excited to. And I was once very excited to start graduate school. I was so excited, I applied to a bunch of programs. I was absolutely devastated when I didn't get into a single program. I did not get a single interview. And so I was, one of those people. It was March, and I was like, oh, any day now I'm going to get my interview requests, and they never came. And 2 years later, I got the rejections. That turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I worked in 2 lab manager jobs, full-time research assistant positions. They're a little easier to get most times than getting into a graduate school. But they are invaluable for expanding your network, for giving you the tools to do research, helping you find mentors and people to give you advice. I knew almost no one when I applied to graduate school. My writing probably looked like chicken scratch to people looking at my applications, and so those turned out to be great experiences. So if you're deciding, between applying this year or doing a lab manager position, or even doing a position in the real world that will give you some contact with data or the issues that you're interested in, then there's no rush to start. First of all, people often don't respond to your emails, especially when they're professors. Sometimes that's fine. You send an email that's asking for resources or advice, or a paper that they wrote, you want to talk to them about it, and they're not going to respond. For the emails that really matter, it doesn't hurt to email them again. It's something that's very scary to do. But twice I did this, and it turned out to be 2 of the best decisions I ever made. They were both about places I wanted to work over the summer. I had gotten a small grant each time to work on my own over the summer, and the first time I wanted to go to the Max Planck Institute, or one of the Max Planck Institutes. The second time I wanted to go to the University of Melbourne, where someone I really admired was. Neither of them responded to my email. I decided to just send a short follow-up email, and then, people got a lot of emails, and they didn't mean anything malicious when they didn't respond, and it turned out to be really great opportunities. This is one that is pretty self-explanatory, finding people who intrinsically care rather than just trying to do it because they want to support you. They might be really nice, but when you actually are doing research with someone who really cares what you're doing, it can go a long way. You can ask your advisor to co-review. They are going to be very grateful to have a co-reviewer, and it will help you see what projects look like when they first go into the research stream, and when they first go into the review process, rather than just when they come out of it. You're going to get a lot of research assistants who want to work with you, or that you can work with early in graduate school, and you want to be a good mentor, and so it's tempting just to take them all, but this is the best way to lose a lot of your time. And you're actually going to be a worse mentor to the average research assistant that you were mentoring if you take 10 or 12. And so I would emphasize taking as few as you think can feasibly do the work that you're hoping to do with them, because you're going to be a better mentor, and you're also not going to spend time that isn't that useful for you or the research assistant. Learn how to code early in graduate school. This is actually really difficult to do because most professors have no idea how to code, and so you can't take classes very easily. I took classes on Coursera and Udemy. Coursera is free, Udemy is cheap. It is not free, but it's relatively cheap. And the best thing about these courses is they don't just teach you how to code in a very matter-of-fact way without a lot of fluff or theory, which is great, but in a different context. They also will provide you with resources like fully formed scripts in Python or R that you can just adapt to your research needs. I'm happy to direct you to any specific courses if you message me. Research has a lot of different activities that have different qualities. There's data analysis, which is often the most fun for many of us. You can get lost in it, and you can get into that state of flow. Writing is often the least fun for most of us, but you kind of need to do it. And I think that that's something that is good to learn early, even if you don't exactly know, what the ultimate fate of what you're writing is doing. But I would try to write as much as possible, even early in graduate school, just to build that skill, because it is an incredibly difficult skill to build, and it's the hardest skill to teach. So your graduate advisor might be able to show you, how to make an R script relatively easily, or how to design a study, but how to write is something that's very difficult to impart. So I just try to spend as much time doing it as possible. Some people do it, have one day where they just allocate to writing. Some people try to write for 2 hours a day or 1 hour a day. I try to write for 3 hours a day. It's really difficult to do, and it often requires, moving around other things in ways that can make you get creative about your scheduling, but I think it's probably, the only reason that I'm able to be as productive as I was is that I just always put writing first. Apply to awards, this can be really intimidating. I didn't apply to awards for the first 4 years of graduate school because I just assumed I would lose everything. But then when you start actually being on the review process for these awards, you realize that only 10 people apply to some of them, or 15 people apply sometimes. I had one award that was pretty great that I was reviewing for, and only 3 people applied. And so often when you see that they've extended the deadline, it's because no one's applied to the award. And so throw your hat in the ring. And you're probably more impressive than you think you are. And even if there are a lot of impressive people applying, numbers aren't necessarily against you as much as you think they might be. This is a really important one. I think that getting a rejection is a really difficult thing, especially early in graduate school. I remember my first rejection, I was angry. I went through all the phases of grief, anger and denial, and then I didn't want to work on the paper ever again. But I think that it's really important to prioritize the papers that you've just gotten decisions about, because those are the ones that, if you just have a bunch of papers that are kind of complete and aren't in the review process, then they can add up really quickly and suddenly you have 10 manuscripts on your desk. But if you keep them in the review process, you'll have less on your desk at any particular time. And then this is the last one, mixing primary and secondary data, using open access data and mixing that with your own projects that you might start or run experiments. And so just in the interest of time, I'm going to run through these slides pretty quickly, but like I said, I've posted this online. All of the data sets here are free. Sometimes they come with a very short application, but they're all free. They have cross-cultural data. They're very high quality. And so if you want to do cross-cultural projects, but you think they're totally infeasible or too expensive, it's not true. There's a ton of great resources out there. And these are collected with a lot of care by the people who run them. And so we should appreciate them rather than trying to do our own cross-cultural survey every time we want to do a question that has some kind of cross-cultural feature. These are data sets that fewer social psychologists know about, but are very, very valuable in my opinion. This is actually my bread and butter. These are data sets cultivated by anthropologists, linguists, and historians of mostly people who have died a long time ago, human behavior in extinct or traditional societies or languages. If you want, I'm happy to tell you after this session about why I think these are really valuable, but if you're interested in any kind of human behavior, social prejudices, gender inequality, those things aren't recent. They've been happening throughout history. And it's really valuable to replicate what we're finding using data from small-scale societies or extinct societies. This is similar to the cross-cultural data set, but they're really large, comprehensive American data sets with relevance to people in different research areas within social and personality psychology. High-quality longitudinal data that have been often painstakingly collected by individual people or small teams. These are all APIs or resources for accessing big data. If you're interested in natural language processing, things that are happening on YouTube or TikTok, this is a big area. I think there are a couple of workshops in NLP and big data methods and computational methods here. So these are all places that you can get access to this data for free, because often you just don't know where to start. I certainly didn't know where to start when I wanted to scrape Reddit. And these are all aggregators. So if there's a data set that you might be interested in that hasn't appeared in my talk, it will probably appear using the search functionality of all of these aggregators that I put up here. This can be really intimidating. Analyzing these kind of data requires often knowing multi-level modeling or time series modeling, things that you might not get in a grad methods class. And so I've also put a slide where there are tutorials on a lot of the methods that are required to analyze these kinds of data sets. And so, these links aren't very helpful when you're sitting in the audience looking at an SPSP presentation, but you can just download the thing and open up any link and immediately get access to these free tutorials. So, like I said, I wanted to keep things relatively short. I'm not sure how successful I was. These are where the slides are. It's also hosted on my Twitter, and really great to be here, and thanks to Max for organizing.
Next we have Tekla.
Hi. My slides are probably even shorter and less useful. I feel like everything so far has been very useful. I also found it difficult to put this together. first of all, because I feel like this is so subjective. What is productivity? What do we mean? Like, how can different people be productive? And also, I wasn't sure if the things that I was going to say were just super obvious. And then also, when Max asked me to be on this, I was like, oh, okay, sure, I'm kind of productive. And then I looked at other people's CVs, for example, like Mark, who's going to talk next, and I'm like, man, can you just stop making all of us look bad? But anyway, so hopefully there'll be something useful in here. What I want to start with first is just to show my productivity over time. These are the numbers of papers I've published, so like added up over the years. That's why it's getting higher over time. And I want to show this because, as you can see, I finished my PhD in 2015. That's where I started my postdoc. And at the end of my PhD, I did not have a single publication. So I just want to show that like, if you feel like you're not being very productive and you're at the end of your PhD and you feel like, oh, damn, like, how am I going to ever get a job? Then, like, and I know it's gotten more competitive over time as well, but you can, like, it's not the end of the world if you weren't super productive by the end of your PhD. You can still have a career. So that's why I wanted to show that. I also wanted to show this because I did a really long postdoc. So I was a postdoc from 2015 to 2021. So that's a really long time. And some people might think, like, I guess I want to reiterate something that I think you said about, like, you don't have to, like, rush into grad school. You also don't have to rush into a faculty position. Having a really, like, it can be really exciting, this prospect of, like, oh, I get to have my own lab and I have to, like, get to do all this cool stuff. And it is very exciting to have a faculty position. I'm really enjoying it. But I think it can also be really useful to, like, not rush into that and actually take time and do a long postdoc. And that has been really good for me. I've been able to be very productive in that postdoc. I also want to mention that I did my postdoc in the same place that I did my PhD, which is something that people might say is not a good thing to do. And I can see why. It's good to get experience, it's good to network in different places and get that experience. But I also think being able to stay in one place and not having that cost of transitioning into different roles can really help you, because you can just stay, write up your data, and focus on the stuff you have. So that has really helped me be productive. I also want to acknowledge some external or uncontrollable factors that have kind of helped me be productive, because I want to acknowledge that there are things beyond our control that contribute to that. So I've been very lucky. I've had very, very supportive and well-networked mentors who have helped me network with others, and who have helped me do the things that I wanted to do. I also had a postdoc advisor with a huge grant, so that just came with the seemingly endless possibility of collecting data whenever I wanted, with however many participants I wanted, and that is something that has, of course, helped me be productive. I also have a bunch of privileges. I'm white, I have no disability, I'm from a high-status country, and I'm fluent in English. And if you don't have those privileges, that probably makes it harder to be productive, especially in a very Anglo-centric academic environment. I've also been very lucky with the editors I've had, being in the right place at the right time. I think that my research specifically is something that maybe would not have been as well received 10 years ago. So I think I've been lucky in that way. And I also have an incredibly smart social psych partner who I can talk through research ideas with, and I realize that that's not something everyone has. But I also want to talk about things that are actually under your control and actually give you some tips that have helped me. I want to reiterate again, people are different, this might not work for you, but these are the things that have been helpful for me. So most important to find what works for you. But what helps me be productive? So some people say, like, you should write every day, you should make time to write every day, and I think that is something that works for some people. That does not work for me. I think I'm a pretty fast writer, but I need a lot of time to get into writing. So if I only block out 2 hours or even 3 hours, it might take me 2 or 3 hours to even get into the writing process. It takes me a long time to get started, and then I'm very fast. So for me, it really works best if I block out whole days where I can just focus on writing, and that helps me really write productively. That can be really hard, especially once you get to the faculty sort of position where you have many things like faculty meetings and mentees who want to meet with you. So that isn't easy, but trying to prioritize that has been really helpful for me. I also think it's good to have many different projects at different stages. So when you really don't feel like working on one specific aspect, so for example, some things require more, like being on more and like being able to focus more. For example, that is writing for me. Whereas other parts of the project, for example, like running the analyses or like putting together the IRB application, that is something that requires less thinking. And so having things at different stages really helps with finding what works for you that day. And being able to use your time most constructively and kind of almost procrastinate on something by doing something else and still being productive. I also, so this is in direct contrast to something that Max said earlier. So I write as I go. There's another aspect of that. So I write as I go, and I write very not very polished as I go. So what I often do is when I collect multiple data for multiple studies for a project, when I have the first data, I write up the method and results sections because those are very fresh in my mind. It's easy to write them up. And then as I collect the next data, like the data for the next study, I write that up. Then I write the sort of in-between things, like the discussion and intro to the next study, where I'm like, okay, here we find out this, and now we're doing this for this reason. And then I write the intro and general discussion at the very end. I also like finding collaborators that you work well with is really important. That can look really differently. Different people have different skills, and you probably have strengths and weaknesses, and finding collaborators who kind of complement those strengths and weaknesses is really helpful. So I'm not a particularly detail-oriented person. I've gotten better at that, but it's definitely not something that comes naturally to me. So working with people who are maybe a little bit better at that is really good for me. Similarly, some people have like other sort of like really strong writers. They might need someone who's a strong writer if they feel like that's not their strength. So just finding collaborators who kind of complement your strengths and weaknesses, but also who you just work well with. Just interpersonally, if you don't work well with someone, that will make the whole research process more difficult for you and probably for everyone. So find people who you work well with. I really like getting feedback from my collaborators early on, so I usually don't write something really sort of polished and kind of try to do that. Like, I do not front load my writing in that sense. I usually figure like, oh, I'm just gonna write something really quickly, see if that even works. Does this argument work? Does this structure work? And then I get feedback early on, and then I can decide to polish it later on. For me, the reason for that is because I feel like if I polish this now and then my collaborators are like, this just doesn't work at all, then I have to I kind of did this work without, and then I just have to delete it all and do it all from scratch again. So that is why I kind of do that. And I think that is also kind of the last point here. Knowing when attention to detail and polishing the work is important and when it is not has really helped me. So as I said, I'm not a like naturally very detail-oriented person, but I've really learned that sometimes that is important, and so I force myself to be detail-oriented at times. But I think it's also important to know that it's not always important to be super detail-oriented. Sometimes it's good to just be efficient and do things quickly and see what happens. I mean, if you're analyzing your data, if you're putting together a survey, of course you want to make sure that that is like well done and you want to double check your work. But if I'm getting writing from one of my mentees and that has a bunch of typos in it, I don't care as long as like I understand, okay, this is the structure and this is what where it's gonna go. I feel like that is more useful. It doesn't really matter that that is super polished at that point. So finding, like letting go of perfectionism at times, I think is really important. And I think some people really struggle with that, but that is something I think can help with your productivity. And that is really all that I had. I'm hoping there will be time for questions later on, so feel free to ask me things. But yeah, that's all I had.
Alright, so finally we have Mark.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I made the bet that the three people talking before me would give me good advice, and so that I can embody my true self as a grumpy old man. And so I'm happy to do that, and I might want to be there. It's good. I call myself a grumpy old man in mechanical technologies. It's good. So a common definition of productivity, I think, this is my own opinion, is that it's when a person produces a high number of outputs, essentially like lines on your CV kind of thing. And that's going to be roughly what I use in the thing here. But it's important to keep this in mind that a lot of times, I think at least when I read the title of this symposium or professional development session, this is what I think most people had in mind. How do I get it done? Goes on the CV so that the CV looks good for when I'm getting jobs and postdocs. So my working model of this kind of productivity is that it's a mix of knowledge, skills, and luck. So knowledge, you can improve that. You read stuff, you go to talks. I don't really think that grad students need much advice about how to get knowledge. You've been doing this for your whole career. This is why you're at where you're at. And I know there's some non-grad students in here too. I think you don't need much input on this. Skills, you practice. Practice is important. You analyze data a lot. You get better at analyzing data. You get, as Josh said, if you write a lot, you get better at writing. It's super annoying to have learned that. I thought there'd be some shortcut. There's not. Just practice. You write a lot, you get better at writing. But you can take courses. You can do workshops. You can find tips and tricks and go to the links that Max provided. These are all. But today I'm going to be talking about luck. So think about the typical process between you doing a project and then getting to that line on your CV. It's a bunch of stuff. You got to choose a research topic, research question, hypotheses, the study design, conduct the study, and so on. Luck comes in here a lot of different places. So for a research topic, for example, I have a bunch of papers that are related to political polarization in some form. We started those papers in 2011 before it got super cool, because I was working as a grad student. Jeff Wetherell is a collaborator. He's also a grad student. He was like, oh, here's this cool idea. And we're like, oh yeah, we can do something with that. And then we were able to do a bunch of stuff off of that. And that's just because it wasn't yet cool, but yet seemed important. And if we had started that research program now, it would no way get off the ground, because everything that we did is of course, obvious type stuff. Now maybe that's because we did it, and so now that's people have learned from what we did, but I'm not really so, I don't think. I don't think that's true. And so you look particularly productive, but it's luck. You just happen to be on this topic at this time. Same thing for your study. Studies work or not, in part because the idea underlying, you're tapping into a real thing, and you have a good study design, but also there's just a lot of random chance. We learned about this in stats class. That's the error term in our models. It's a super annoying little sucker. So there's all these different ways that luck plays a role. But I think it's useful to think about kind of luck in two different ways. There's controllable luck, which I'll talk about mostly here, and there's also uncontrollable luck, which thankfully Tekla did a great job of listing all the things that I would list under kind of uncontrollable luck, like whether your particular background, you're not going to change that now. That's a difficult thing to do, right? And this is where you're at. Saying for the research topics, I don't really think we should follow trends on research topics. So if you're just not interested in a cool research topic, that's fine. It might be cool later. I also know people who followed research topics because they were cool, and then they got burned later because they weren't cool anymore. And that's where their interest was and how cool it was. It's not a good approach. So, where you these are kind of luck things you don't have much control over. I don't think you shouldn't have much. But there's other lucks where you can kind of put your thumb on the scale in statistical terms, because I'm a weird nerd. This is when your random errors are actually not random errors, but they're correlated, correlated residuals. So I'm sure you remember that in your stats classes. So controllable luck is this luck where you can put your thumb on the scale a little bit. You can take some of the error out of the equation. So one way that I think that's useful to do this is to identify and test competing hypotheses. This comes up, this is most famously talked about in this paper by Platt, and it's called strong inference. And he talked about strong inference as first is devising alternative hypotheses, then devising a crucial experiment with alternative possible outcomes, and then carrying out the experiment to see if you get these results. And what's nice about this is that rather than having an experiment that's does this idea work, yes or no, where then if you're wrong or random chance isn't on your side or whatever, you're just stuck with no. That's very hard to publish anyway. But if you have multiple competing hypotheses, here's these different explanations, assuming that the study's conducted well, which I'll do it, then whatever kind of comes out can be particularly interesting. The SPSP paper that Max put up as his example of reading aloud paper in his tutorial, you should actually then go and read or listen to that paper, because Max does an excellent job of testing competing hypotheses in that manuscript. Another one that's kind of been mentioned by some of the past speakers is developing a team. Now this can be your direct collaborators, their co-authors, it can be your advisor, but it can also just be other people who are in your lab, friends that you have, and they can serve a lot of different purposes. So it can be the person that you reach out to for stats help, and that might be somebody different than the person that you reach out to just bounce general ideas off of. Those are different skills. Sometimes they're correlated, sometimes they're not, and it's useful to kind of be cognizant of who these are, because then when you can take care of or try to address some of the different challenges that come up in a research process by having this team of people that you can call on. There's also this other added challenge of sometimes things that really get in the way of doing research and being productive in this sense is that there's just weird professional situations in your department or within your lab, or just kind of things come up, and having the person that you can go to and bounce hey, is this a reasonable way to address this? And this person doesn't even need to be an academic or familiar with academics, they just need to know how to deal with people. My partner is very good at reading emails for me. The other thing I'll say, this is maybe more controversial, is I actually don't think you should rely on motivation almost at all. And although you should be, it's good to have a topic that you're motivated by, because that will help. But I used to work as if I would wait to really do stuff until I was okay, now I'm motivated to work on this experiment, and I do it. But then in my third year of grad school, I had a child, and then I was his primary caregiver for a couple of years. And so then I worked when he napped. I had no other choice. That is when I worked. And if you have to work when your kid naps, you can't be well, I hope I feel motivated during those 2 hours. That doesn't work. So I learned this, but he's 13 now, so he doesn't nap anymore. But I learned that you can, I've trained myself to oh, it's time to work on this. I sit down and I work on it. I think sometimes this takes the glamour out of it or whatever, but if you're doing this for glamour, I have some other unfortunate news. But I think it takes some of the mysterious kind of qualities out of it and so on. I get that, but I think in terms of getting stuff done, if you gotta get to be productive, you gotta do a lot. You gotta analyze the data, you gotta collect the data, all of this. And if you only wait till you're feeling in the mood for it, it's gonna be rough. Some people do this and they block out 9 to 5, and that works for them. It's never quite worked for me, because at 9, I'm still actually half asleep no matter what time I wake up. And I kind of like to just not do stuff in the afternoon. So I kind of have my 9 to 5 split up across different parts of the day that work for me. Other people, you can work 5 hours every day and but never have a weekend. Other people really like their weekend. I don't really care what you do, but having some just nope, this is work time. I don't really care how motivated I feel. Not that you work perfectly every time. When I feel motivated at those times, it does go better, for sure. But I think relying only on this motivation is going to be rough. It's also as you move through, now that I grade more than I used to, right? And I never feel motivated to grade. It's not a thing that happens. But it still has to get done, and so this process helps for those things too. I want to end though by kind of challenging the definition of productivity. I think filling out the lines on the CV, I get it. I get where that comes from. I'm not naive, but I think you want to think about what you want to get out of this. And a long CV might not be what you want or need out of this thing. And so I think there's just some other definitions of productivity that I'll leave you with, that you can kind of see what sits well for you. And you don't have to choose just one, of course. You can mix and match, it's fine. But I think sometimes for productivity, it might be that your work impacts policy in some way. And that might not be a lot of lines on the CV, but it might be a couple of lines on the CV that are really important policy relevant work. It might be that your work does a good job honoring the communities represented in your work, and that you really take their perspectives and integrate it well and represent that well in a way that kind of honors and puts forward their perspective. And that might be really productive for you. That may be really important for how you see your work progressing. It might be productive that you just learn a new skill. That doesn't really show up on CVs very often. I mean, maybe you say programs I know, R, Excel, whatever. But it's not really a thing. But that sometimes what you're doing is you're learning new skills. And sometimes productivity might be when you just develop good working relationships with your colleagues, forming those bonds, both as collaborators, but also as people. And so when we think about productivity, I think we want to kind of avoid, or at least try to avoid, thinking about just those lines in your CV, but also these other ways that we can be productive in our work, forming relationships, honoring the communities that we're both part of and that we represent, and these other skills and ways that are working happen. So thanks.